All right. So here's this article. Oil weapons and realpolitik. Why some countries want to stay on friendly terms with Russia. India relies on Russian-made weapons. Israel needs cooperation to strike inside Syria. Gulf Arab states look to Russia to help manage the oil market. Okay. So I'm going to talk about what is basically our allies. So, NSO, this. To operate in Syria in a Pegasus way, Israel essentially relies on basically what is Donald Trump negotiated Zionist people negotiating with Putin Russian intelligence that gives Israel a path into the dark webbing system that Syria and all those other Islamic terrorists would be utilizing this. And so their main counter ability comes from being able to extrapolate their actions before they make any actions, utilizing to place this is what puts Putin in a very powerful position, because essentially if they were to start to have the same rhetoric as the United States, this ability would probably cease, and then they wouldn't necessarily be able to anticipate the movements of Islamic terrorists in the region. And so that puts certain issues in place. So then you have essentially what is Slovak Eastern Bloc region, Cuba, Venezuela, North Korea, and China, all that are dealing with essentially what is, these countries are notorious for laundering Silk Road, basically, as a major form of their economy. And so the 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 theoretical Silk Road that they use has a full bombardment by Islamic terrorists. And so to operate this type of stuff requires, in ways, some of this cooperation kind of stuff. And so then when it comes to India, they're getting Russian versions of AIs that operate their weaponry and stuff. And so the whole idea is that it's not the same AIs. They have different characters and their codings and stuff. And that is somewhat of their defense proprietary stuff. And so for India to operate an errorless AI that operates tanks or weapons or gunships or whatever it is, it relies on needing to be able to link to the Russian defense AI for that stuff to operate properly. So that's probably the reasonings for why India is maintaining a, sub, a subversive alliance kind of idea. So then what you have essentially is Putin, who essentially is trying to, well, his economy's failing, and the go-to for that world is to start a war. Okay? for the Zionist world. It's to start a war. You know, more than likely, this tech boom of the late 90s and this countrywide kind of real estate shit probably would have been starting to happen in an economic way around the 2000 era. And that starting a war gave a way for defense to fill up the treasury with selling weapons and stuff like that. And so that is where essentially somewhat of their go-to is to start a war when the economy gets all shitty. The Russians, they're still considered a major superpower. They do the same thing. China will be looking to pull money off of this type of situation as a middleman that supplies raw materials, stuff like that. Their economy is always in need of this type of stuff. Also, when it comes to this world is essentially like, when it comes to tech, you have like Ukraine, and then you have the Eastern Bloc, and then you kind of have like a South American world that has these type of people doing tech in that area. And so this is where a lot of money is extrapolated off the cocaine market. And a lot of this tech stuff is about pushing laundering of illegal money. That is where these economies rely on a lot of that stuff. And that to target Ukraine, essentially like Facebook. When they bought WhatsApp, they would have been like, oh, we'll just hook our AI. And then everything would have ran shitty as fuck. Because it operates in different architectures. So with that comes like where Ukraine essentially has built a tech industry that has meshed together APIs that are somewhat sought after. See, this stuff. See, if Putin was able to get some of this Ukrainian API stuff to work, he could potentially go into countries that the United States has sold weaponry to be running American-made defense equipment utilizing his shitty Russian AI. And so that would be something to where it's somewhat gives like I'm sure we sell older weaponry to China, you know, we sell older weaponry to these places. Not these places, but the reality is that then in ways there's somewhat of a need for this American weaponry to operate within basically what is a Russian dark web world. And that would require this and these APIs to run the American equipment in a Russian dark webbing system. So in ways, the tech, I call it the API's wizard, I call it that. But that the tech of Ukraine becomes a very centralized aspect to all of this. Because essentially what they're doing is exactly what these people kind of need. See, these people, they get DOS computers and stuff. But then they use Russian dark webs. And see, their whole country pretty much like has Russian dark web that then has a bunch of shitty DOS computers that run inside of it. These APIs can then build separate, currently the United States in lots of ways is able to utilize certain aspects to using DOS computers in the Russian dark web systems. It's similar here also. A lot of this stuff, a lot of these Chinese world is like that too, you know. They copy. Apple makes their iPad over there, and then China just makes a China version. It basically just cuts and pastes. But an iPad in a Russian style AI won't necessarily run very well, becomes prone to exploits and stuff, and that this becomes where basically America makes all that stuff there and then they copy it. So server blocks that are built on United States architectures, and in lots of ways this stuff means things for investments that move into Russia also. So that's where this stuff, this API stuff, this stuff is actually very important because essentially a lot of these companies, see, if they're in the West, yeah, the West's dark web is made for the West's computer technology also. And since the communists are notorious for just copying everything, the innovation aspects are lacking in lots of ways. But they have their own theoretical different dark web system that they prefer to operate in. And so this is where I notice Israel. And then one of the things that I know about Israel is that when it comes to this skull CIA kind of shit from like George Bush and this Zionism stuff, there's a link. There's a full on, like, those 8 Republicans that like voted against the bill to sanction or something like that, they would probably be all self-ascribed Zionists. And that is an important link in all of this, because those people become somewhat of a negotiation when it comes to communist world and the Israeli world. And that what I've noticed is that the people that ascribe to this stuff essentially are a lot of times subversively a part of group funds and dark webs that go around ripping off terrorist-based Silk Roads, basically. And that's the kind of stuff that, you know, these people aren't very smart, okay? Right? You just have to know how they think. Well, these people are smart, but, you know, like I say, this is their program. And that they can't be cut off from Russian dark web. That'll be the one main reason. And then, this is my theory, is that Russia, Putin's waving some sort of patriot, like, moral reasoning, and that I think what'll end up coming out after he pulls information and data out of Ukraine, what you'll see is that subversively Ukraine was probably inundated by Islamic terrorists controlling the tech industry in ways. And then that's kind of what he probably sits subversively with, like a moral kind of like how Donald Trump would be. I mean, this is like what it kind of is. It's like he has like a moral, theoretical authority in all of this about going after terrorism. Okay? And that the fucking tech industry is like, see, in the United States, there's a massive problem with these fucking sadist little mopies and shit being and having ties to Islamic terror drug and infiltrating tech companies And so then what you have in Ukraine is a whole culture of everybody that fucks everybody and everything into a blackmailing system. And so this is what it is about, like, about any of these places. These people, they don't necessarily have like a moral religious ethic based on USSR's devoidment of religion. And so that stuff kind of holds over with their whole culture, where they don't technically have any qualms or internal moralities against fucking 14-year-olds and shit like that. Okay? And so with that, when it comes to a worldwide tech industry, if these like Mark at Facebook, if he was to see those executives at WhatsApp pedal banging or something, fired. And that is what instantly becomes a terrorist control or a communist control, if this is just like a theoretical what if, and that this is like literally where that's all it kind of takes, and that to get into Russian dark webs, you got a pedal bang. And so then that's like, that's kind of what it is. And so it becomes very difficult for tech companies in ways, because they're stuck where these people, they know that Meta and Facebook would literally destroy a whole executive board for doing that and for letting this infiltration stuff happen over there. If that stuff ended up coming out, everybody erased. And so there's like an example of like how they subversively control tech companies, and that becomes increasingly more easy in regions that Islamic terrorists and Turkish people can flow in and out of. See, there's a very easy free flow of Turkish people through Ukraine. With that comes a higher probability of terrorist targeting for this type of stuff, or searching through this type of stuff. And see, in America, it becomes very difficult for Turkish people, but they utilize people that blackmail horribly, and that then they have them doing the stuff that the Turkish people would be doing here in the United States. And so that's somewhat of what will then, they do that in Putin's like pedobanger net, okay? And that then he can sit there with his own intelligence group, probably having somewhat of a people that come in this name that essentially like stand witness to his reasonings and shit. But then, since Don Trump pedobang land isn't in office right now, that stuff gets held back as proprietary intelligence or some shit like that. And that is kind of where the moment that Putin starts laying the groundwork in like a UN evidence kind of way on subversive control over politicians and the tech industry. And then all he needs to do is start talking about how he outfitted his whole country with speakers and how everybody's getting sound tortured, which he'll be subversively causing for these reasons. It's just what it is. That's the glasnostes. But it'll probably come from subversive aspects to a tech industry in Ukraine that probably has some very subversive control by Islamic terrorists in the region. And then this is like, it's the pedobanger way. It is. It's the, they seem like they're not doing something right. Their secondary messaging has them with like a moral authority, like persona and imagery. And then everybody's calling him a dictator and stuff. And then eventually, if it starts to work against him, you'll probably see that he'll start laying the groundwork for his liberation. It'll probably be along the lines, it probably won't be in the newspapers, but it'll probably be relayed through the Glassnest phone to to the White House and intelligence over here, and that and it'll involve like his country not talking about the speaker, but sitting around being tortured, being blackmailed, people controlling their corporations, people forcing pedal bangs and shit, all that stuff. It'll probably involve that type of stuff, and then the United States and the UN and NATO have to sit there because if put in the same position, we too would probably move forward in that type of way, like if Mexico or something was being subversively controlled by terrorists that then were forcing sound tortures and extortions and controls over our companies and stuff. We too might be able to justify a liberation of Mexico in a similar type of theoretical way. And then that's the kind of stuff that pretty much like being a main UN council person gives them the same theoretical authority that we would have for going in to potentially this one's got a tech spin on it or something. But we went into Afghanistan, they were blowing up our buildings. I mean, this is, and then they're going into Ukraine, they're controlling all of their economy, and I mean, this is where to be. The reality is that the link of Donald Trump and Putin about this stuff, it's where probably Donald Trump probably knows about this stuff. He would have been using this. I'll tell you, he would have been using this all day long. And since he doesn't really like, smart ass fucking millennials and shit, he would have been using and weaponized, he weaponized FBI. He would have weaponized like leverage over the corporations that he doesn't like. And so then he'll probably be sitting back doing his golf swings, feeling smug about knowing that Putin has technically some sort of moral justification that he just isn't talking about. A lot of this stuff is that Putin does a very typical KGB kind of method of make-dumb, which is to let everybody be stupid and dumb, and then at the end to go, terrorism. And then everybody to have to be a hypocrite and to talk against. Okay? I mean, these are like, this is where he's, that's where Putin is trying to train KGB agents, and that this is the type of trainings that they did. And that this is the kind of political, it's like if our CIA trained somebody and then had them become a senator or something like that. It would be like that. And so that's the kind of stuff that their version of that type of shit is literally to make them. They let the world create the boogeyman about them, and then they crush the world by making them look like bitch brain hypocrites. And so I would, in an anticipation, I would make, there's a way to approach things. It's like, here's Ukraine, here's this free flow of the Turkish people and stuff through it, and like I've seen with these tech clubs that do the ISIS drug shit up here in the Northwest, I've seen what they've been able to do inside of the United States in what would be a very secure kind of place, and that Ukraine does not represent the level of security from that stuff, and that then we, since it was so easy for those tech nerds to free flow through the United States, they essentially used the same procedure, and that my guess is that the Turkish terrorist world was probably free flowing through that and doing that same tech club blackmail mill kind of tech psycho-y shit, and that is what eventually turns them all into terror slaves. And so the in this area, it's like the people doing the Russian intelligence contracts. See, when I talk about this stuff, about how we're like basically kind of at war, in the Russian silk or intelligence stuff that they have with these groups of QAnons and stuff, see, they can stop based on risk assessments. The fucking other tech nerds around here, little mopies and that are still doing the pedo stealing, that are still doing the blackmailing of cops and all that shit, those people are part of ISIS drug, and that they don't have the ability of like risk assessment at all. So that is like a difference in essentially they'll be doing the same thing. See, the communists, they a lot of times utilize these ISIS drug people to just be doing a mercenary contract for them as like a middleman. But that the moment it becomes like too sensitive and risky is the moment that they cut that stuff off. But then the terrorists essentially, when the communists do their blackmailing, targeting, the terrorists also take that stuff when they utilize their slaves. And so when the communists pull back, essentially, then they still run like a yearly automated loop. The terrorist drug systems still run. It doesn't matter if those people end up prison. There's a whole list of people to replace them instantly. They don't care. Their approach is to put waves of people that literally once somebody gets like busted, their audio procedure tape then just randomly go, not randomly, then it goes to somebody, the next person in line, and they literally take over.